Welcome to Account Management Secrets. I'm Alex Raymond, and today we're tackling a big question. What is the future of customer success? My guest is Ed Powers, an expert in customer success and account management who's seen firsthand how these teams are evolving. Right now, customer success is under pressure. Companies are cutting budgets and CS leaders are being told to prove their impact or risk being sidelined. For many, it feels like the role is shifting from helping customers succeed to just hitting revenue targets. In this episode, we ask, why is customer success struggling to justify its value? What can CS leaders do to show their impact in ways that matter to CEOs and CFOs? And is combining CS and account management the right move or a mistake? This is an important conversation for anyone in post-sales, customer success, or leadership roles. And if you're wondering how to adapt to these changes and make your work count, let's dive in. Hey, Ed Powers, great to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us on Account Management Secrets.
Great to see you again, Alex. Great to be here.
So there's a lot going on in 2025 in the worlds of account management and customer success. Lots of change. There's a lot of change in the air, so to speak, this year. And I'd love to kick off today, just to get your perspective, because you're someone who has a lot of background working with account management and customer success teams. You've done it yourself, so to speak. You've also helped a lot of companies with their projects and their processes. And I know that there's just so many different things that are coming up right now in this conversation around post-sales. And so from your point of view, Ed, when you look at 2025 and you look at this conversation around customer success, what does it mean? Where is it going? And account management, where, again, same thing. What does it mean? Where is it going? What do you see most happening out there? What's on the mind of the C-suite leaders that you are working with or the C-suite leaders that you're talking to?
Yeah, as 2025 begins, I think we're in a transition year for sure. I think 2024, tail end of 2023, there was quite a hangover from COVID. There was an explosion in tech when people started working from home, huge increase in expenditures for IT and for software and things like that. And I think what happened in customer success, because there was such a big pullback in tech, there are a lot of questions. What are we really getting from this? As tech companies saw a slowdown in the rate of new orders, their customers were pulling back quite a bit. So tech companies went through massive layoffs for the last 18 months or so. And, customer success teams were hit like many others and worse than many others as well. And I think the challenge was trying to understand, well, what is the real value of this? We've had a lot of ideas about what it was. We had a lot of good intentions. When money was flowing, we didn't pay much attention to it. And then once we had to tighten our belts, well, we didn't hear a compelling story. So unfortunately, customer success really got hammered. A lot of people were let go. And I think we're at the tail end of that as we go into 2025. There has been a little bit of a reset. And one of the things that has changed pretty dramatically is that there's an intense focus about, well, if we're going to have this function, it has to be revenue generating. There's been a transition in a corporation towards more account management than where it had come from. And the other major change is that whatever is happening in terms of onboarding, that has to be done at scale. It's no longer a one-on-one kind of proposition, a very manual process. How do we drive all the cost out of this, right? We know that we need to onboard some people and get usage up and things like that. How do we get people out of that process? So I think really both of those have been going on. And I think as we open up 2025, there will still be quite a debate about roles and responsibilities between customer success and account management. And I think there's still going to be this intense focus on how do we take cost out of the system for long tail accounts. I think you're going to see that continue. And the big question mark is, what role does generative AI play in all of this?
And so is the underlying narrative here that, is it simply a case of like people didn't understand that customer success drives revenue and therefore they're when need requires, they're starting to cut in that area? Because when I've talked to CFOs in the past, Ed, they're super supportive of customer success. They understand the retention dynamics. They understand that customers get more profitable over time. They understand that they've got to recoup this gigantic cost of customer acquisition, which, by the way, has just been getting bigger and bigger and bigger over the last 2 or 3 years. So I've often seen CFOs as being supportive of post-sales account management and customer success because they understand the value of retention. In your experience, is that getting through, or is there a gap in knowledge and understanding there?
I would agree. That's been my experience working with CFOs, is that they intuitively understand that. And then when they talk about, like you said, the acquisition cost versus the cost of retention, it's a huge difference, right? So they kind of get that. What I think they struggle with is specifically what activities that customer success does as a function. What are those activities that contribute to that overall goal? And I think it's easier, certainly in the minds of senior executives, to look at customer success like you would an account manager or a salesperson and say, well, if I can't tie a number to it, what's it really doing for me, right? So I think the gap is understanding things like onboarding, change management, adoption. What is the economic impact of that? What is the economic impact of building trust with a customer? Well, that has been very fuzzy. It's a lot of hand waving. There's no real numbers that tie those two things together. And if you don't have that, if you can't kind of show convincingly that cause and effect, then they're not going to put money into it, right? They're going to take the easy way out, which is, well, just give them a quota number, right? And
Yeah.
think about them as account managers, and that's where a lot of these customer success teams are headed if they're not already there, is they report to a CRO now, generally a salesperson, as opposed to someone who is really looking at the customer experience.
That's very much the case. I do see CS teams moving in that direction. But I just want to come back here for a second and say, if there's a disconnect, so the CFO understands in theory that this team of people who are called customer success are meant to be driving long-term retention and profitability, but they don't see it in the data. I'm going to make a hypothesis here. I'm going to make a statement that falls on the CS leader's shoulders to make sure that people understand what his or her team are doing every day, and specifically that they can tie back the activities to the indicators and the KPIs and the metrics that the C-suite cares about the most. And I would say that's a responsibility that a lot of CS leaders have not been taking up with a lot of gusto. Is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement. I couldn't agree more. And it's not easy to show, right? I mean, because if you think about it, let's say we do a tremendous job of onboarding and change management, and we help customers get from the promise of value to the experience of value. And they see it and they're nodding their heads up and down. They say, yep, this is what I purchased. This has met or exceeded my expectations in terms of value. Great. That is a process. It's not necessarily easy to measure that of and by itself, start to finish. But then the next question is, well, so what? So what if they have that higher level of trust? So what if they have higher adoption? How does that then impact retention and expansion of revenue? Now, just thinking about that, if you have people on an annual contract, right? When will you see that actually come into effect? Well, a year after they first purchase from you, when that contract comes up for renewal. So even if you fix it and you wave a magic wand and it is perfect on day one, and say you have, a 90-day onboarding process or what have you, you're not going to see the effect of that for another 9 months, right? Because now you have to see what impact did it make over time. Now, that is a long period of time, and that's a long time to wait to see what those results are, number one. Number two is that requires some statistics. And unfortunately, most of the folks that I see in customer success are not real comfortable working with numbers. And you have to do some analysis to really show that. And you have to know how to do that analysis, right? And that's not part of the tool set. So if they haven't done that, if they haven't built that case and kind of shown that relationship, that cause and effect, then it's going to fall on deaf ears, right? So I think that's part of the problem, is that, customer retention, loyalty, expansion, that goes beyond one function, right? That is a team sport. If you look at the overall outcome, Everybody contributes to that. Product does, engineering does, marketing does, sales does, customer success, support, accounts receivable, company policies, all kinds of things go into this overall outcome that everybody is seeking, which is higher retention and expansion of the install base. But that's not one function. So as you break that down, you could also ask the question, well, what does product do to contribute to that? What does support do to contribute to that? What does accounts receivable do to contribute to that? None of those other functions are even on the radar to produce that kind of proof like you would in customer success. And I think a lot of it is people conflate customer success as a function versus customer success as an outcome.
Or customer success as a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that happens a lot. And one of the responses from the CS community is, hey, churn is not our responsibility 100%, right? Meaning there are a lot of reasons that a customer stays or leaves or what have you. And they're kind of the ones with the targets on their back all the time around this customer churned and or this customer stayed. So they're both getting too much credit and too much blame, I think, for a lot of this stuff. And maybe that's part of what's contributing to this thought of essentially consolidating teams. So what's happening is CS teams and account management teams are getting merged together, right? Mm-hmm. They're getting merged together in some ways, either because the CS team, sometimes the CSM is now reporting to an account manager or a key account manager. I've seen that happen, right? Mm-hmm. Where you basically are having these pod structures set up, or the whole CS function is just going underneath the revenue function as opposed to a CCO or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so that's very, very different. And I think because of this kind of lack of understanding of the roles and the responsibilities and who's what, there's a lot of gray area out there, right? So there's a lot of gray zone. How are you seeing people, or how are you recommending that we start to dissect this and think about this?
Well, one thing that's been interesting as I work, I've worked with a lot of different clients in my consulting work, and I have been a VP of customer success for a couple of different companies. And as I work with larger and larger companies, very large tech companies that you have heard of before, who are multi-billion-dollar global enterprises, they have all this stuff already. And many of them grew up through, selling hardware and software. And what software that they sold was really on premise, the old days of software. And there's still a huge installed base of that out there, although their customers are going more and more to the cloud or hybrid or things like that. But in these monster global enterprises, they have, wired networks of channel partners. They've got global sales teams. They've got account managers. Whatever you want, they've got it, right? Because they have such a broad set of products and solutions, and they're all over the place, and they've been doing this forever, right? So looking in those environments, a lot of times the clients that I'm dealing with are like, well, what is this thing called customer success, and why do I even need it? Thinking in terms of the function, right? And we're selling more subscription-oriented things. We're kind of getting comfortable with this particular product on a subscription basis that complements or perhaps replaces some of our more traditional products. How do we do this? What does this mean? How do we apply what born in the cloud companies are doing within our environment, right? And that's an interesting conversation because I got everything else. So how do I differentiate this function or this role of customer success versus account management? And the one thing that keeps coming back over and over and over again in all these environments is that nobody in the traditional sense is really taking ownership or focusing as intently on that initial change from the order, from the expectation of value to that experience, that full experience of value, right? Mm-hmm. We all buy things with expectations. We anticipate some outcome at some point in time. And when everybody is heavily siloed and everybody's doing what they do, salespeople are closing orders and professional services are finishing projects, and support folks are closing tickets. Everybody's focused on what they do. But as a customer goes through their journey, what do? They hit all these seams in the organization and things get thrown over the wall. No one's really paying attention to that customer's experience of value, that closing the gap between the expectation and the realization of that value. Nobody owns that. It just gets lost in all the silos. So if you think about where is that unique contribution of the customer success function, it is smoothing out all of that and making sure that that customer is seeing that change in people, process, and technology, making that smooth and efficient so that that account becomes a set of believers in the brand, in the fact that they did get the value that they had anticipated, and that will strongly impact what their future decisions are, right? So there is a process that goes on inside the brains of customers based upon their expectations, how well they were realized, and what that experience was like going from point A to B. And nobody owns that, right? Nobody owns that. And there is value to having someone own that and to have that role outside of account management, outside of support, outside of all this other stuff, developing new products. That alone has tremendous value, right? So when you make that case, now you have to say, well, what's the impact of that? Well, now we're back to measurement. Now we're back to what is that role? Nobody's doing great. We need that role. And then, they can be on a team with account managers and salespeople. And there's a lot of different formulations that can work. And if you're dealing with an install-based customer, and if you're providing that value, yeah, they're going to be buying more and more stuff, and you're going to be coming out with more and more products. Well, guess what? Every time they buy something new, they have to change something. They change their technology, but they also change their people in the process. Well, again, who owns that? So as you're rolling out new products and services and what have you, you still need that role. So there is that need for that particular whole that even in global companies is not being fulfilled without customer success as a function.
So you're hitting on one of these topics that gets talked about a lot that I would say is easy to say and very hard to do, which is measuring customer value. And the way that you phrased it is, a customer has the promise of value. So that's why they signed up in the first place, because they think they're going to get X, Y, and Z because they bought your service or they bought your product or what have you. And then there's the experience of value, meaning what did they actually get? And sometimes those are on par. Sometimes they're lower than expectations. Sometimes value is higher than expectations. But generally speaking, post-sales, pre-sales, actually the whole lot of anyone who's touching the customer typically does a really bad job of tracking what that value is from the customer's point of view. Marketing will come to us with like, here's the briefing book, here's the pitch, here's the deck on, what we think the value prop and the talking points are and stuff like that. And sales will have its own maybe ROI models or other things that are going to go into that. And then, of course, once the customer becomes a customer, once they sign the paper, then they're finally like, now that we're a customer, we're going to tell you everything that was really going on inside of our company. And you start to learn a lot more. And sometimes alarm bells go off. So for the implementation team or onboarding or account management or CS, like all of a sudden we have a lot more information. The goalposts can change, right? So we thought we were solving this problem X. Turns out we're solving X plus Y, for example, right? Like, so the scope changes, expectations can change. Basically, we just get a lot more information. And it's so easy. You go to these meetings or you listen to this podcast and people say, all you need to do is track value, right? And it's easy to hear that and say, okay, sure. But like, what does that actually mean? How do I do that? How do I get the customer to agree that this indeed is the value that's worth tracking, that this is the metric that we should be caring about and stuff like that? And so I know this is kind of a big topic and a long question that I'm asking here, but I hear so many people talk about this idea of value, and what I think our audience here is really looking for, it is like, how do I start? Like, what do I actually do here to solve this problem? Because everybody recognizes the pain, they all feel the pain, but how do we start to solve this?
Yeah, and I think it begins on understanding what is value, right? I mean, like you said, companies go to market with a value proposition, with a strategy, with a message, with something that differentiates them from other providers in that market. Who are my target customers? What are their unmet or undermet needs? What is it that I'm providing to them? Why is this better than the alternatives? And what is the outcome that people should expect from that? That's your value proposition, right? And generally speaking, it is very measurable. And it's usually a couple of things in technology. You see a lot of times it's a time saver, right? So there's a productivity gain, or there's some new insights as you get because you see things in some new ways, right? Those are probably two of the most common, is that there's a cost savings, productivity gain, or insights, right? I mean, I'd say it's 80% of it right there. It all kind of tracks to that. Now, that's a great message. It gets people attention that have specific needs and they're in the market, they're looking and they're making comparisons. And there are objective things that people will look at. But one thing that you learn in sales, and I spent 6 years in sales myself, is that that's not how decisions actually get made, right? People make decisions trying to balance their individual needs, desires, and wants with what the collective, needs, desires, and wants are as well. And those two have to kind of match. And there's a social process to that, right? So, understanding what people's individual and personal wins are, those people who are participating in making that decision, that's what a good salesperson does, right? They don't go in there and just talk about a whole bunch of benefits and where's my order. It's understanding, what does this mean to you? What does this mean to you individually? What are you trying to get out of this, right? And understanding who's participating in that decision and what do they need to win? What are they individually looking for? If you have enough of them seeing a personal win, guess what? They're going to all get together and agree with each other. Hey, this is really good for us because it's also good for me. So understanding what those personal wins are. Is this, for example, is this going to help me get noticed by my boss? Is this going to help me get that promotion? Is this going to take stress out of my day? Is this going to have me work less hours, or do less tedious things? What is my personal win? And that varies depending upon who you talk to, right? Value is relative, personal, and it's it's not absolute. It's one of those things of what does it mean to that person? What's in it for them? And that may vary quite a bit from what your value proposition is. That gets you in the door, that gets you the conversation, but a good salesperson now starts to connect those individual and personal wins to that purchase, right? Now, for the same thing, if you're in account management or in customer success, you got to do the same thing, right? That can't just exist in the mind of that salesperson who brought the deal, and that has to move forward, right? And to your point, things can change. So, for example, what I have worked with clients to do is to think about, how can we use a better onboarding, customer experience, customer success as a way to close a deal, right? So how can we actually bring that upstream so that that conversation happens and those decision makers in the room and the customer success person says, I'm here for a simple reason. I'm here to make sure that you get, that you're successful and you meet all of your goals and you have a good experience working with us, and hold me accountable for that, right? So that is a message of, I will be responsible for you, and that is my job to make sure you're happy and successful. And successful meaning you get the value you expected individually and collectively, right? So how do you get that worked in? Part of that onboarding, let's say you close the deal. Part of that onboarding is to clarify and verify. This is what I thought we all agreed to. This is what I thought was true. Let's check that real quick. All these decision makers, yes, nothing's changed. That's all good. Or, to your point, Alex, there were a couple of other things we want you to be aware of, or these things did change, right? And to get that alignment, once again, with all those people that participated in the decision and who have expectations, and to get those crystal clear, individually and collectively. What does this mean for you individually? What are you trying to get out of this? I'm going to work on that in your behalf. I'm going to make sure that we do that. I'm going to write that down. And collectively, what are we trying to do? So value depends on a lot of different factors. It is, what is the corporation's value, the business value, and the things we can point to that are objective and measurable and all that. But what really drives the decision is, what did this do for me? And even to go back after the fact, when you reach that point, when you should be seeing that value, you said, this used to take you 6 hours, now it takes you 6 minutes. That's a big change. How did that meet with your expectation? Oh my gosh, that was amazing. That was absolutely amazing. They've had that value experience, right? And it's meaningful to them because that took all that aggravation out of the day, opened up the day to do more productive things. that is a moment of truth for them, right? Or moment of proof is what I typically call it. You got proof. You expected this, and this is what you got. And let's talk about that. Do you see that proof? Yes, I do. That value was delivered. That was received. I feel good about that. Now let's close the loop for me. I've met or exceeded my expectations. You got to do that with every one of those participants in the decision-making unit. All those people need to come to that. So it's not just, what is value? Well, value depends upon the observer, depends upon what that group is and what individually and collectively what they're trying to do.
So are we teaching this to customer success managers and account managers today in a proper way? Are people actually doing this stuff in your experience?
I think really savvy salespeople, really good ones, understand that. And when I was selling back at HP, the masters would do that. I mean, you would see these people that just year over year would just kill it. And they were not big talkers. They were amazing listeners. They could ask such great questions, and they would track everything that's going on, and they would figure out either, very systematically, or they would figure out very intuitively who are the people that are really going to be part of this decision, and what are they looking for. And they would spend time with those folks and learn that, and they would talk about it, and they would surface that. And the really good ones would say, you know what, I think this is really going to look good in front of the boss. And they would just drop these little things out because they would say, this person is really motivated by that. And they would say that, just throw that out there and then move on to the next subject, and people get the message, right? And really, really good salespeople understand that, and they do that all day long. There are very, very few really good salespeople out there.
Right.
And by the same token, if you look at account managers and CSMs, that's not even on the radar, right? I mean, we're trained on the product, and here's your battle card, and here's what you should say, and here's the process, here's how we want you to put it in the CRM. Off you go, good luck, call us if you need help. But they don't really understand how do decisions actually get made. And the more you understand how that social dynamic works, the individual and the collective dynamic works, and you know what to expect and how you can facilitate that, then you really start getting some good results, right? But it's more psychology than anything else. Sales, and I believe customer success, account management, doesn't matter what industry you're in. This is a people process, And if you understand that, how decisions get made, how people learn things, how they realize value, how expectations are met or not met, and how subsequent decisions are made. If you understand all that, it doesn't matter where you work. It's the same thing.
One of the things that I think that account management and customer success teams suffer from is lack of consistency, meaning we don't all do the same thing in the same way. And so therefore, when the CFO comes knocking, he or she can't see the same thing happening and get the same result, right? Well, like 1 unit in and 2 units out type of thing. So people are really varied about that. And that's where my question was coming from around, do we teach this? Because of course you're going to have the people who intuitively grasp this, and they track value, and they understand how to speak in to the customer's needs and their innate goals, and they're really great at that stuff. And then you're going to have the ones that aren't. But you can't create a super high functioning post-sales team if some people get it just because they're born that way, or because of a previous experience, and other people are doing other stuff. And I think that the consistency thing is one of the things that's holding this industry back.
I would agree. And I would also say that there's a presumption of control that doesn't actually exist. Control is an illusion. And we tend to think, well, salespeople can bend the will of their customers into deciding the way they want them to decide. That is not true. Your typical salesperson maybe closes a third of their deals, right? And a key part of being a good salesperson is being constantly out there and filling your funnel, right? You have to have some multiple in your funnel in order to make sure, just on average, you're closing at a particular rate, right? So really good salespeople are constantly filling the funnel. They are better at qualifying and identifying, and they have some better skills. They're better qualifying, closing. They learn tactically how to do things a little bit better. A really good salesperson maybe closes 40% of their deals. None of them close 100% of their deals, right? So because you have if you have a good product, a good territory, a reasonable number, if you hustle, you get out there and you bang a lot of doors, just by sheer numbers, you're gonna make this thing happen, right? So, but that's very different than account management and customer success because your pool is much smaller and your ability to control those outcomes is a whole lot less, right? So, if you look at it from this perspective, when someone says, "Well, where are the results from this thing?" Let's take a step back and say, "What can you actually influence?" You can't control the outcomes. There are some things you can do that will influence the outcomes that can raise that probability. If we do these things, knowledge, skills, processes, strategies, techniques, we can raise that probability. That has economic value. Does that control the outcome? No. Who controls the outcome? Customers. Customers are the ones who decide. Customers are the ones who renew, right? I mean, that's how this works. So when people look at salespeople or customer success, they forget about the fact that you don't control outcomes. You only can control what you do. Any of us, we can only control our own behaviors, our own attitudes and decisions and behaviors. That's all any one of us can ever do is control ourselves. We can't control anything else. But what we can do is we can influence. And the knowledge, skills, practices, that raises the amount of influence, and it's never 100%. So at the end of the day, that's what's really important. It's not about control. It's not about perfection. It's always about improvement. If we are to get 3 points better here, another point better there, that magnifies tremendously, right? And that's where the return is. But I think a lot of people lose sight of that.
Now, when it comes to the point here is that business is complex. There's a million moving parts. You can only control what you can control. So that's going to be your actions and your behaviors, and you can hope therefore to influence other people and have a certain outcome. For me, this raises a question of what are the right measurements here. We've gone in the post sales world, in the account management world, we rate everything from NPS to customer happiness to net revenue retention to gross revenue retention to bookings to upsells to churn rate, et cetera. We have so many things that we're tracking there. If we want to maximize our impact, if we want to really be, kind of set up in 2025 for success to show, here's what I'm able to influence, here's what we think the outcome will be, put probabilities on that, increase our chances of success and so on. What are the handful of things that we should be focusing on? And what are the things that you think are just pure vanity metrics, red herrings that we need to stop worrying about?
Well, I'm going to give you the consulting answer. It depends. At the end of the day, yes, customer retention, net recurring revenue, those are business outcomes, right? And everybody's striving for that. And that's important. But you can only, if you're talking about an individual, it's only what you can personally do. If you're talking about a work center or a process, what is that process capable of doing? And then what is that process? What's the connection between that process and that outcome? So when I think about KPIs, it's about what is my process? What is it that this function or this role is intending to do? And so what? What is the connection between what happens at the process level and what happens at the business outcome level? That's where the disconnect is, right? So focus on yourself first. What are my knowledge and skills and motivation? That's all you can control. The next level above that is, well, what is the process? I work with other people. We have some goals that we're trying to achieve. We have some workflow. We can measure that workflow. We can measure what those individual things are, those activities. Which of those actually produce that outcome, right? And what is the strength of that relationship between what we're doing and what is that business outcome? So that's all we can really look at. And that varies tremendously by the role, what is that workflow? What contribution is it actually making? So for example, customer success, you mentioned before about what are the reasons why customers churn. You can actually measure that. And you can see, and the vast majority, 60 to 80% usually, has to do with the offering. Unmet expectations for quality and value and what you sold them, right? That's usually the biggest single one. The next is the relationship. Something about that business relationship isn't working. They don't have attachment to you. They don't trust you, or they don't like the way of, the product is okay, but I hate doing business with them, right? That's the relationship stuff. There's another piece of it, which is customer, our needs change. We don't need buggy whips anymore. We bought a car. Okay. We're not buying that product. We're not buying that from anybody, or we're going out of business, right? No, they're not buying from anybody. Those are customer issues. You can't touch those. Nothing you can do will influence those. And then the last is really, it has to do with market dynamics. How replaceable are you? How many other options are there out there? Who else can give me the same outcomes that you do, but they're better price, or they're easier to work with, and am I willing to make a switch? Is the cost and risk of switching nominal enough for me to make that decision, right? So when you really break it down, the relationship, 20 to 30% if you're lucky, that's all any of us in sales and customer success and account management can really influence, is maybe 20 to 30%. That's it. Everything else is other stuff, right? So then you break that down and say, well, what are those things that we do that actually contribute to that have influence on that, focus on that? Those are your KPIs. Show that connection. If we improve here, it's cause and effect. If we do better here, it's going to do better over there, and I can show that. And I made an improvement here, and I got this slightly better result over here. You can demonstrate all of that through the math. But the exact KPI has a lot to do with context and the environment.
Yeah, it does. And it's also a larger education that's needed of the whole company. So if customer success is a strategy, it's not just a team within the organization, then we need to be really sharing this with everyone, like across all sorts of different stakeholders, so they understand, hey, I'm only able to influence 20 to 30% of the entire outcome here based on my actions and based on the resources that I have. And so that's a new reframe for a lot of people, because a lot of people will just simply say, well, hey, your job title says customer success, so go get that renewal, or what have you. So really, this is about shifting the perception that people have of that. And just to come back to where we started this conversation, Ed, I would say, based on what you're saying, it's not surprising that over the last year and a half to 2 years, it's really been knives out for the CS teams, because it's hard to explain what they do every day. And they're not great at, getting up there and tooting their own horns. And they're not great at linking their day-to-day activities with outcomes that anybody cares about. And it feels like that's the main call to action here, is to get a lot sharper at linking how what we do drives higher probabilities of the outcomes that we want. And there's a lot of nuance there that I think not a lot of people are getting.
That's exactly right. And to give you an example, one of the clients I work with about a year and a half or so, helped them actually look at this. And what we found going through their data is that when customers achieved a certain milestone, a certain value realization milestone, the odds of them renewing and expanding increased by a factor of 5.5 times versus those who didn't get there, right? So if your process in customer success is to get more customers to that value milestone, and you were to take that out, right? Let's just say, let's get rid of customer success, and now those customers no longer get to that milestone. You just dropped your probabilities by a factor of 5.5 times, right? That's money. That increase in probability on average is money, and it's a lot of money. And when you actually break it down and you look at what that impact is, it is substantial, and it more than pays for the function, right? That alone. If you want to then go upsell, cross-sell, do really good account management, take them to the next level, sell the next thing, God bless you, go. But they're not going to do that unless they first got the value that they expected predominantly, right? So if that doesn't happen, it's anything else that you sell many times is contingent upon that, is conditioned on that, right?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Well, hey, Ed, wrapping up here, last question is, what is your advice for a customer success leader who's, getting the look from the CFO or the CEO, and is suddenly thinking, "Uh-oh, I've got to get out there and really justify my existence." And maybe this is not something they've been doing in the past. Maybe all of a sudden they're thinking, "I'm in the hot seat. I need to do something here." What's your advice to those leaders on how to reframe the conversation and to get out and to win that conversation?
The thing that I always keep going back to time and time again is understand why your customers leave and why others stay and buy more. The why question answers everything, everything. And all good things come from customers. If you're not crystal clear on that and you can't quantify that, you're lost already. When you go out there and you understand the reasons why people decide what they decide, and you can trace that back to what you do and how that impacts those reasons, that's where the magic is. Start with that. Start with what is driving the behavior of your customers. That is the secret to everything.
Really, truly live customer centricity. Understand
Yeah.
that without customers, you don't have a business.
And understand their realities. Set yourself aside for a minute and understand what are they doing, why are they doing that, and that answers everything for you. It really does. And most people assume they know or think they know or knew 5 years ago. They don't really know. They don't know to the level or to the depth that they really should know. Because if you did and you could quantify that, now you've got the path. Now you understand everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super. Thank you so much, Ed, for being here and guiding us on this journey to set ourselves up for success in 2025. Really appreciate you being here on Account Management Secrets.
My pleasure, Alex. Great being with you.